That's amazing. Thank you for that, Lauren. And thank you very much for giving me the time to talk about this today. Very elegantly, I'm going to ask you to flick on to the next slide, please. Yeah, so this was a survey that we did. And I think one of the really good things about it was it's a genuine pan-European survey. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to, as it says on the screen, understand brand and agency attitudes towards the key challenges they faced in terms of obstacles for spending money online, stuff that they were concerned about. Have a look at some quality standards, people's attitudes towards things that the IABs were doing in different countries, and to try to get under the skin a little bit of the drivers of buying digital advertising. As I said, we were really lucky in that we got 119 responses, but from 20 different European countries, which I think gives it a really good, proper pan-European aspect. And two things we were able to do, which I'll pull out a little bit in some of the data today, was we were able to compare attitudes between agencies and brands, and also attitudes in those countries that already had a sort of quality scheme, for example, the IAB UK Gold Standard, the Quality in Poland, etc., and those in countries that didn't have a sort of existing scheme. And the balance between those, as it says on screen, was quite near to 50-50. So we're able to draw some sort of quite interesting comparisons. And in the next sort of 15 minutes or so, I'll just go over some of the basic results and draw out a couple of things that I thought were particularly interesting. And then, as Lauren says, we'll have a panel discussion. So if you could click on a couple of slides, please, Lauren. So yeah, so the first thing is all really about the stuff that people are concerned about. And in the survey, we asked people, when buying digital advertising, how concerned are you about the following 5 challenges? And the reason that we picked these 5 challenges is that these are the 5 that are included in all the existing sort of quality schemes, so whether it's UK, Germany, France, Poland, etc. The gold standard, for example, includes brand safety, ad fraud, privacy compliance, and user experience, but not viewability. And for some of the other studies, it's a little bit different. But anyway, you can see in terms of the buyers, their level of concern about these sort of different factors. And actually, if you added together very concerned and concerned, the lowest was ad fraud at 75% and the highest was viewability at 89%. But in terms of the percentages of people that say they're very concerned, you can see that 2 sort of stick out: brand safety at 47% and then viewability at 51%. So of the kind of big 5 challenges, those are probably the 2 that sort of spike the most concern. And if you move on to the next slide, please. So a really good example is we can contrast the attitudes of brands and agencies. So this is the percentage in each case who said they were either very concerned about brand safety or very concerned about viewability. And all the way through this, you start to tease out slightly different attitudes amongst agencies and amongst brands. So you can see 61% of brands said that they were very concerned about brand safety, compared to just under 40% of agencies. And thinking about this a little bit, I suppose it makes sense. Agencies want to do the best job for their clients that they possibly can, so they're going to be concerned about brand safety. But if you're a brand, actually, it's your own organization that brand safety issues could do damage to. It's your reputation, your job, the reputation of your organization. So it makes sense that you'll be even more concerned than your agency partner about possible brand safety risks. And it's a similar thing for viewability. If you're a brand, you want to make sure, in particular, that the ads you're serving are actually being properly viewed by people. So the viewability concern tends to be higher than it is amongst agencies. And if you whiz on to the next slide, please. And so this is the first time where we'll actually contrast countries that do have a scheme against countries that don't. So you can see the countries that have a sort of existing quality scheme: UK, France, Poland, Germany, Sweden, Ireland, and Italy. And then there's a whole bunch of countries that participated in the study that don't yet have an existing quality scheme. And the thing that's interesting is that actually people tend to be more concerned in a country that has something like the gold standard. And I think it's really difficult to unpick the cause and effect. That you could say that maybe if an IAB is talking a lot about challenges and has something to tackle those challenges, then one of the side effects of that is it actually raises awareness of some of the concerns in the market. But I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing, because those concerns they exist, and the more we talk about them, the more people understand them, the better place we are to cope with them. But there's a contrast between countries that do have a sort of quality scheme and those that don't. So those are the sort of very basic results. And what I wanted to do now is to go a little bit further and unpick some of those sort of attitudes a bit further. So if you click on a couple of slides, please. So the next sort of 3 or 4 slides are all about agree and disagree statements. And we asked a variety of stuff in here, which hopefully for media owners is relatively encouraging. So just to go through these very briefly, 97% actually agreed that buying inventory in a quality media environment was important to them. And 84% agreed that they were willing to pay a premium for higher quality, premium, trusted inventory. So the really interesting thing about that is a conversation I quite often have with media owners is, what's the connection between what people say they do and what they actually do? So in theory, attitudes are really positive towards paying a premium for that quality inventory. But does this actually translate into action and a change in behaviour, which is one of the things that's worth exploring a bit more. And then finally on this slide, there is slightly under half of people do actually agree that buying as low cost as possible is important to me. So yes, people are concerned, they want to favour the premium inventory, but there's also a significant proportion of people out there who are happy to buy it as cheap as they possibly can. And if you was on to the next slide, please. So again, this sort of backs up some of the stuff on the previous slide, where we've got 92% say they prefer spending their advertising budget with suppliers that adhere to industry standards. And that's a very general point about industry standards. It's not necessarily an IAB scheme, could be TAG, could be something else, but 92% prefer spending with a supplier that adheres to industry standards. There's a relatively high level of awareness, 90.8%, so that they're aware of IAB advertising standards. And really encouragingly, 73% say that they check if a media owner or supplier adheres to industry standards before spending budget with them. And then finally, the flip side of that, we do have roughly 1 in 5 people who say, look, I don't mind about industry standards. I'm happy to spend my digital advertising budget wherever I can get a positive ROI for my brand or product. And let's just go into that a little bit further. So the next slide, please. So this is where, again, there's a couple of interesting things to pull out. There's a difference between brands and agencies. In the first one, agencies are more likely to agree with the statement, buying inventory at a low cost is important to me. Much more likely to agree with that than brands, 55% versus 43%. Again, brands, you're thinking about your own reputation, you're thinking about the environment that you want to appear in. From an agency point of view, you might be under a lot of pressure from clients to get campaigns away, to make sure you achieve that reach. So possibly they're not quite as concerned about that. And actually, it's a similar story with the other graph, where we say that concerns about digital advertising have discouraged me from spending more of my budget in digital. So agencies, quite a pragmatic view, we've got to get this campaign away, we've got targets to hit, we've got reach figures to achieve, whereas brands are a little more cautious when it comes to some of those challenges preventing them spending. And then the next slide, please. So for me, if I had to pull out one thing to remember, I think probably it's the figures on this slide. So here we're contrasting markets that have a quality scheme, such as the UK, France, Poland, Germany, Sweden, Ireland, and Italy, with the other countries that don't yet have a quality scheme in place. And what is a sort of difference in attitudes? And I want to pull out the second chart on this slide in particular. So this is the percentage of people that agree with the statement, I don't mind about industry standards. I'm happy to spend my digital advertising budget anywhere where I can achieve a positive ROI for my brand or products. And what you find is, in a market that doesn't have a national quality scheme, people are 5 times more likely to agree with that statement. So even in a sample of sort of 120 people or so, I think that's relatively significant. In countries that have introduced a quality scheme, only 6% will agree with that statement. I don't mind about industry advertising standards, whereas that leaps to 32% when you've got a market without a scheme. So I think the conclusion that I draw from that is that being vocal about how you are solving those issues and how you're asking people to adhere to standards can change attitudes in markets, which I regard as really positive. There's just one more slide to show in terms of new areas, and then just a sort of couple of conclusions. So if you could just bump it on a couple of slides, please, Lauren. So this was an interesting question for everyone. So we said, look, we know that we're dealing with viewability, brand safety, etc. Mostly those standards are relevant for programmatic display advertising, but we're really aware of a range of new formats that are coming up. So we said, of these new formats, of these news channels, on a scale of 1 to 5, how important do you think it is to develop standards in each of these new areas? And again, the spread is it's a relatively thin spread from 2.7 to 3.4. But the area that people were most interested in us developing new standards in was connected TV. And that really resonates with the conversations that I have. So people talk about connected TV being a really big opportunity. And actually, there's quite a lot going on in there, quite a few challenges, maybe particular in relation to ad fraud. And so actually connected TV was top of people's list when it came to developing new standards. So those are all the slides. The full version is able to download on the IAB Europe website. And if you just click on a couple more, please, Lauren, to the summary, it's really interesting to note that brand safety and viewability are currently the most important issues faced, which I think is a really interesting sort of sense check. The good news about buyers is that according to the data from this survey, they do value buying media in a quality environment. And in theory, they are happy to pay a premium for that. And reassuring to know that actually about 3/4 of them will check to see if a supplier adheres to industry standards before committing budget. And finally, just recapping on that last thing I showed, where the percentage of people who agree with the statement, I don't mind about industry standards, is much, much lower, 6% in those markets that have an industry standard, compared to 32% in those markets that don't. Having an industry standard, encouraging people to participate, does appear to change sort of buyer attitudes. So that's just a very quick sort of run through the survey. There is a full version that you can download with a bit more detail on the IAB Europe site.